Hello and welcome to the Eddie's Tech Talk podcast. This podcast episode is a bit of a special one just because it's a movie review, which I'm not a huge movie person. I'm not a massive movie fan. There's movies I like that are out right now. I like the John Wick movies that are out, like a few different movies, but I don't go to the theater all that often. But I love Star Wars. Let me tell you, I love Star Wars. I remember as a kid, I didn't want to watch it. I was like busy doing something else or something, and my parents were like, "No, you should watch these. These are good." And so I was hooked ever since. So I love Star Wars. I've watched the movies so many times. I mean, I've lost count. I probably watch them, 3 times a year or something like that. Each movie. So I watch them quite a bit. I've played all the video games. Basically, all my video game library is Star Wars. If it's not a Star Wars video game, it's hard for me to play it. So I'm just all in on Star Wars. I am a huge fan. I get really into, the movies and what happens and the Force and the Jedi. I'm just really into all that and kind of how it all works. And I'm a bit of a Star Wars geek. Now, I know that there are bigger Star Wars geeks than me out there probably, but I mean, I do own a lightsaber, so I think that gives me some pretty serious street cred. So this podcast is really just going to be talking about The Last Jedi. It's just a conversation, that's how I started. That's why I started the Eddie's Tech Talk podcast, is just to have cool conversations, to connect with people, to share thoughts. So I'm getting into that, and I say we because my friend Eddie is here. I am also Eddie, not to be confused with this Eddie here. We're not the same person, I promise, so say hi to the people, Ed.
Hi, this is Ed, and just to avoid confusion, I'll go by Ed for the duration of this podcast. That way you don't get, a whole Ed and Eddie, who's who. And so I'm also a Star Wars fan. I'm not quite as voracious Star Wars fan as Eddie here, but I've also watched all the movies. I played the games growing up. It's been a real good time. Funnily enough, I can't remember when I saw my first Star Wars movie. I just know I was young and I loved it. I mean, I remember the movie well. I mean, I zone in on the movies and I just love rewatching them. And so I was thrilled when The Last Jedi came out because I just, it was another taste of that wonderful Star Wars world. And I was just ready to dive in.
So, I mean, you said you were really ready to dive in. You were really ready to go. And so I'll kind of talk about my initial reactions first, Ed, and then you can kind of get into yours because as we'll get into later, and this is a full spoiler review, just disclaimer, if you haven't seen the movie yet, turn the podcast off now. I would do a spoiler-free review, but I don't really know how to do that. I don't think I'd be very good at that because there's just so much in this movie, especially this one versus The Force Awakens in terms of things to talk about, I feel. So it's tough for me to kind of convey the essence of a movie or anything, really, without providing examples, without kind of getting into things. So this is going to be a full spoiler-on review, so don't say you haven't been warned. I'll put it in the description as well of the podcast, so we're just going to get going. But I'll talk about my initial reactions first, what I thought, and then Ed, you can kind of get into if your initial reactions and if your enthusiasm for Star Wars, kind of where that stands now after The Last Jedi, because as we'll get into later, deeply divisive movie among hardcore Star Wars fans for a variety of reasons, which, we'll touch on later. So I've seen The Last Jedi 3 times now. It's been out since Thursday, and it's now Friday. So I've seen it quite a bit on the opening weekend. And so I there's definitely things that you pick up on your second viewing. So if you haven't seen the movie more than once, I definitely recommend it. So I'll kind of come at it more of a perspective of someone who's had time to process, had time to take things in, whereas Ed has only seen the movie once. So he will... he'll get into kind of just seeing the movie once and how that is. So, Ed's correcting me. It's been 8 days. So, again, I've just seen the movie a lot, and I'm excited about it. When I first got out of the movie, everyone knows I'm a big Star Wars fan. So my phone was blowing up. There were texts, how'd you think? What'd you think? What's the deal with this movie? And I didn't know. They said, did you like it? And I said, I don't know. I'm not sure yet. And, there's a variety of reasons for that, but I just didn't know because there was so much in this movie that I feel kind of turns Star Wars on its head. It kind of redefines maybe a little bit what it means to be Star Wars, what it means to be in that universe, which is jarring for a lot of people, which I'm sure is why, there's a lot of backlash. But my initial reaction upon viewing number 1, I left and I just went, end credit scene was up and I just went, man, I don't know what to think. And I don't really know how to elaborate on that anymore. I just didn't know because what happens with Luke Skywalker. I mean, this guy is my boyhood hero. I love Luke Skywalker. Like, I grew up feeling like I identified with Luke. I felt like Luke. And now he's just this broken guy who, he's not training Jedi anymore because he failed. And he's got this cynical outlook and he's not as hopeful as he used to be. And, that's what happened to my boyhood hero. And then you have Finn and Rose, which I like their characters a lot, but their storyline was a little all over the place. And Luke dies at the end. Again, my boyhood hero. That's what becomes of him. I just didn't know how to take all that information in, and I didn't know what to do with it. So that was really my initial reaction. And then upon seeing it a second time, I was able to firmly say that I like this movie, and I'll tell you why. I think that The Force Awakens was a great movie, Star Wars Episode 7, great movie, but it did borrow a lot of familiar beats and themes from Episode 4. So, and it was a great movie upon rewatch. I watched it the last weekend because my dad wanted to catch up before we went to see The Last Jedi together. And, upon rewatching after seeing The Last Jedi, it was still good, but I think that the quality of that movie degrades just a little bit because a lot of the questions posed in it are kind of not really answered or shuffled off to the side in The Last Jedi. So, but in any case, after seeing that movie again, I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome. I think that, I'm excited to see what happens in 9. I'm excited to move forward. I'm excited to see what's going on. And, I've said excited a lot here, as you can tell. So, the movie, it took a little bit of time to grow on me, but after a second and third viewing, I think I'm safely in the, this was a great movie. I'm going to watch it as soon as it comes out on Blu-ray. I'm in that camp. So, Ed, I know I talked a lot here, but, what did you think? What's your enthusiasm level at? Did I hype you up a little bit here? What's going on in your mind?
Well, Eddie, I did only see it the one time, Tier 3. And going in, it's interesting. When I go into a movie, I try to not have expectations, just because I want to go in blank slate and let the movie do the talking. I don't want my speculation or like my hopes and wishes to like color it. I want the storytellers to basically sell it to me. And that was hard for this movie because it's Star Wars. It's really hard to go in and not, be like, oh, what's going to happen, and really try and tear it apart before you even get to the opening credits. And I have to say, I came out and I was like, it was a good movie. But that's, and that's kind of how it was. Like, there was that hesitation. It was a good movie. But at the same time, it was just kind of like implied, thinking about it after, as time went on, it was just kind of like, well, it was no original. And you said, Episode 7 really borrowed a lot from 4, structure-wise. And 5 was a little bit more adventurous, but you could tell, it was also kind of like the Episode 5, I think, of this new trilogy. I mean, Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, and boy, do they, our plucky rebels, they're in a corner on Hoth, they're escaping, and you're like, oh my gosh, the vice is closing. Can they do it? And then, they drop the bombs about, Darth Vader and all that, and you're like, oh my gosh. But they tried to do that, I feel like, with 8 here, with The Last Jedi. And I don't know if they quite pulled it off. I mean, tone-wise, yeah, they hit it. And it was kind of cool with the ship scene in the middle. They really kind of basically put it all in a pressure cooker, plot-wise. Like, they had the tension. But at the same time, it just didn't feel as if they pulled it off as well. It just kind of left me thinking, yeah. But at the same time, it's just like, I knew there was another one coming out. I knew they weren't going to really jettison, the key characters. and it just kind of came off as almost or like not quite there.
I mean, I think those are interesting points that you raise, Ed, for sure. But I mean, I don't think that it's very fair to compare this to five. I mean, I know it's the sequel in a new trilogy, but like Episode five, in my opinion, is the best Star Wars movie, and it's probably the best sequel of any movie ever. So that's like rarefied air up there, and I just don't think that this was really that comparable to five. I think the only reason that people really want to compare it to five is because episode seven was so much like episode four. They wanted to see if episode eight was so much like episode five. And I think that this movie was played up in a deliberate sense to, in the initial part, appear like it was gonna be like Empire Strikes Back. You are escaping. You're escaping the base. The Imperials destroy the new Rebel base, and you're fleeing the Imperials, and your numbers are down, and it seems like you're up against the clock, and you're about to go down. But then I think that this movie does so much throughout that's so much different from any other Star Wars movie that we've seen before. You have this just dynamic in the Force that's different now. You have this just cynical tone of Luke Skywalker. You have the Force projection later. There's a lot that's going on here that I think just is so different from any Star Wars movie that we've ever seen before, that it's really enough to set it apart, in my opinion. Now, you might disagree with me there, but that's where I'm going. I don't know if you have a rebuttal for that, Ed.
Yeah, Eddie, like, I see your point, and I agree. Tonally, like with the cynical Skywalker, they definitely took a departure from it. Everything's not as simple as it was before, in a way. Like, there's deeper things, there's, new folds to characters and what they will, explore. The world's gotten less black and white in a way, which is both really cool, but like you said, it's a little unsettling with Luke. But as far as a five comparison, I do think, at least on some level, it is warranted. I mean, if you look at it, if you pare the movie down to a bare bones, which I know is not entirely fair in a way, but you can look at it kind of like this. You have the escape scene at the beginning, like you pointed out, but there's more to it than that. You have parallels. You've got Luke and Yoda in five. I mean, he's lost. He's upstart. He's like, train me. He's got an idea of what he needs to do, and he's impatient to get there. And in this movie, you have Rey and Luke, and their dynamic. It is very similar. And then you have that whole plot narrative. And then you also have and then at the end was, not the very, very end, but the end fight scene at Crete. Was very, very much, I believe, framed like the Hoth battle, even to the point where they had the guy taste the layer of salt on the ground just to say it was salt and not snow. I mean, so they definitely did some... I mean, because when you think about it, I mean, seriously, when you saw that lineup with the door there, and the turrets, and the trench there, and the layer of white there, did you not think of Hoth?
Well, I think I did, but I think that's the point. Is it was similar enough to say, hey, look, this is a Star Wars movie, but there's so much that they did so different that we haven't talked about yet that is just so much different, and we'll get into that. So our initial reactions, we disagree quite a bit, actually. But, let's get into the rest of the podcast, kind of take you through the movie, our thoughts, some controversial scenes and just stylistic choices that happened, and we'll definitely get into all of those. Hopefully we don't forget anything here. But, we're hardcore Star Wars fans, and we could debate this topic until, at literally the end of time. This will probably be a longer podcast, in fact. But there are a lot of fans out there that are newer to the franchise. My girlfriend, I got her to watch all 6 movies leading into 7. She saw them out of order. Don't get me started on that. She saw 4 and then 7. It was not a good time. I didn't have control over that. But she's new to the franchise, so I kind of asked her. She went to the opening night premiere with me. She actually really likes Star Wars, went as Rey for Halloween, which was pretty cool. So I asked her to kind of give her thoughts as a newer fan to the franchise, and then also my cousin. So these are all around college-aged people. giving their thoughts here. And she's also a new fan to the franchise. So I just kind of want to read off. She just got out of her first viewing of the movie. I asked her to text me her thoughts. And here's what she said. And Ed and I will kind of get into this, talk about this as we move through the movie and kind of how that goes. So she said, I think what struck me most was Rey's interaction with the Force. We saw Luke's training and Anakin's training and how long both those took, but she has two quote-unquote lessons, and suddenly she can take on Kylo Ren and move all those rocks. And I don't fully get how Luke did that remote Jedi business. If Jedis can do that, why didn't they ever do it before, especially in previous battles? And since when does someone equally powerful rise in the light as in the dark? There she's referencing Snoke when he says that, when he's got Rey up there. And she said that didn't make sense to her historically. She said, but she's a relatively new fan, so there's a good chance she doesn't know what she's talking about. So I think that these are really good questions, especially, she said that she really, really liked the movie. She said it was fantastic. So she had an overall very positive opinion of the film, but I think that her questions coming out of it are very fair. So, Ed, what's your take on these? And I'll kind of have the last word on this one.
Okay, that sounds good. And it's nice to hear those questions just because I have seen all the movies. And like you said, I was comparing it to 5 a lot. And that's the trouble with seeing them all. And so I like her take on this. And so I find it interesting from a training perspective because she's right. It did seem fast with Rey's. And I found it interesting, too, because in 5, there's a much more... And I'm sorry I'm comparing it to 5 again, but she did mention Luke's training. And so it's interesting with Luke being the teacher, and, I thought it would mirror more his. But it wasn't. It was much more... I mean, it was only 2 lessons, don't get me wrong. But there was a much less emphasis on, search your feelings. There was much less emphasis on emotion. There was that scene, in fact, where Rey just doesn't even care and just kind of goes into that dark hole, that dark side place, which they didn't really elaborate on. So that'll be interesting to see where they go with that. And Luke's absolutely horrified. But then they just kind of don't brush on it again. And it was just like, wow, it was just kind of like, I don't know, pared down, less, I don't know, spiritual, less mental, and more... just kind of straightforward than I thought it was going to be. What's your take, Eddie?
Well, I think that right now we should, as we start to establish a flow for the podcast, really talk about the beginning part of the movie in terms of the training scene, because, before that, I don't think it's really discussion worthy. Outside of Poe's character arc, the first opening fight scene with all those resistance bombers moving in, I don't think that that's a very good talking point. That's valuable in terms of Poe's character arc, which we'll get into later. But I think the real meat of this whole thing is with the training. That's where we really get started on, where I think this movie kind of changes gears versus Empire versus A New Hope versus Return of the Jedi. I think that this really starts to set the tone for that kind of changing in the franchise, changing. In Star Wars, there's been a disturbance in the Force. So I think it's important for us to talk about Rey's training and how it is different to when Luke trained Yoda. And I do have problems with Rey being so strong in the Force with no formal training. That is an issue for me. That was an issue for me after 7, and it remains an issue for me after 8. But I feel like in 8, it's kind of marginalized a bit more. Maybe it's because I'm used to it from 7, but I kind of just accept that she's good. And it's not as big of a sticking point for me anymore. But in any case, just kind of going over that training, they do focus for a while on getting Luke to want to train her, and that's kind of a big portion of her time on Acto or Octu or something, I think it is just kind of convincing him to get his head out of his butt and get into gear. And I think that really the most interesting thing for me out of Rey's training that's so different from other movies is it even kind of calls out the movies, because, you said it's not as reach out with your feelings heavy, but they do have that scene there. and he says, reach out. What do you see? And she sees light. She sees darkness. She sees violence. She sees peace. She sees all these things that lead to the balance. And then she does see the dark place. But Luke says, like, look at that. Like, can you feel that? Like, that's like a visceral feeling there. That doesn't belong to the Jedi, which I thought was so cool and such a great line and a tie into the prequels, because when I was a kid and watched the prequels, I thought they were cool. But then you kind of examine it when you get older and you're like, man, the Jedi kind of like, what were they doing? What were they doing over there? They kind of have some weird beliefs. And I think this kind of returns the Force to like a visceral thing, like this almost tangible thing around you. Whereas in the prequels, it's very, I don't know, almost more academic or more just reserved for the Jedi and the Sith. And I think that's just such a great line, and it kind of turns things around when Luke says, the Force isn't just for the Jedi, which was super, super interesting. And kind of as they progress through these first couple of lessons, yeah, like it's not as thorough as even Luke's training with Yoda, but I think it does kind of lay these good foundational pieces for us as an audience and for Rey as a character to say, okay, let's take a step back. Let's take a step back and look at things here. The way that we've been thinking about the Force and thinking about the rules and how this all works, maybe we have to rethink that. Maybe that's not the right way. And I think that that's scary for a lot of fans. I think that's scary for, I'm sure it was a pretty risky take by Rian Johnson, the director. So, I just think that line kind of sets the tone for that training sequence. And, I'd be eager to get your thoughts on this, Ed, because, that was something that was especially fascinating to me. And then also later, Luke, I think that's the whole second lesson, is Luke just says, the Jedi were vain. At the height of their power, they allowed Darth Sidious to gain control of everything and start the Empire. The Jedi were wrong. And I think that, I'd love to get your take on all of that.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that was a departure from the previous, view of the Force, and I think it was refreshing. I think it was good, because if there's one thing this new trilogy of movies is doing, and Rogue One by extension, is that it's switching up our view. It was much more straightforward, I want to say, with the original trilogy. You had the Alliance, and they were good, and then you had the Empire, and they were bad. You had the Jedi, good, and then you had the Empire's Sith power structure, and they were bad. I mean, they evened it up. They switched it up a little bit with Darth Vader in Episode 6, with how that all ended. But for the most part, it was cut and dry. And so the fact with this that it's a bigger than just that, it's right or it's wrong, it's this or it's that, was a really, really good take, a really good expansion of it all. And I was really glad they did that. And you're right, they did talk about, the beingness of it all, how it was all around, a part of Rey and a part of the surroundings. And I agree with that. I was just really surprised that they didn't talk about the, like I said earlier, the emotional connotations of it all, because Luke was so tied to the Force and so influenced by it, and emotion was such a big thing that he cut himself off from that. And it's been said throughout the past that, emotion and how you look at things really does shape your experience with the Force, which makes sense in a way, because if you look at it from a perception standpoint, how you think or feel about a shower of rain, can really depend. If you're depressed, it's very dark and gloomy. But if you're happy, when you think about it, that's what makes life sprout. It's, what ushers in a new spring. And so that makes sense from a light, dark side kind of perspective, but they didn't really touch on it. It was more of a, like you said, a foundational, like, here's the base of it. And so I kind of want to segue in a way, because as you know, Luke was very, very reserved about teaching Rey. And, the reasons for that, obviously, is how he failed with teaching his earlier apprentices and Kylo Ren in specific. And so I want to get your take on that and how that, not just how that affected Luke, but how you think it affected, the perception of the Force in general in the series.
Well, I mean, I don't quite know about the perception of the Force in general, just based on Luke failing Kylo. I think kind of as we kind of move forward and get into that, the whole failing Kylo thing speaks a lot more to those characters, I think, than it does about the Force, because we've seen the light fall to the dark and the dark, get redeemed back to the light. So I don't think that that's out of the realm of Star Wars or the Force. But I think that a major topic as we kind of move forward into character arcs and character development, which I think this movie had fantastic character development, is people I think are really arguing about, when Luke, which I thought this was a great part of the movie, when Luke originally tells about his confrontation with Kylo, and you buy that, and you're like, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. And then they have people are calling it force time, which I think is pretty clever, between Rey and Kylo, and he gives his version of events, and then Rey kind of basically beats Luke with a stick, basically literally, to kind of get what I think is the most correct version based on what we know of those events. And I think that a lot of people are arguing of, is Luke igniting that lightsaber and thinking for a half second, am I going to end this? I think that that is the point where we depart from the Jedi are these Jesus-like, monk figures, because they mess up. And people are saying, well, that doesn't seem like it's in Luke's character. He's a Jedi. He's got to do all these things. He's got to always be right. But people mess up, Jedi or not. And I think that that was the real message there. And I think that was well within Luke's character to kind of have that moment where he's like, I can end it. And then it passes and he's like, no, I can still try with Kylo Ren. I can still succeed here. But obviously the timing of that, didn't work out. And then Kylo Ren turned on him, fully. So I think that that's really the big takeaway there, more than changes to the Force itself, is just changes to the characters. I think they seem more human after that. And that's a big takeaway is Luke just saying, yeah, I thought maybe for a second, but then it passed, and by that point it was too late. So people are saying, this is what became of Luke Skywalker, but I actually do like what they did with that. I think that is well within that character, and that kind of gets into those moral quandaries, because people are like, oh, you can't do that, or that was so wrong, Luke. And I agree. I think it was wrong. I think he made a mistake. I think you can still try. He should have still tried to redeem him, or taken another tactic in that situation. But that gets to these weird questions people ask. If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, would you do it? And I think that most people would probably say yes. So how is this any different? He's reached inside Kylo's mind. He knows where he's going. He knows the path he's going down. He's basically Star Wars Hitler. And so can you really blame Luke for almost going for that? I don't know if you can. I mean, that's something that the fans will have to make up for themselves, but I don't think that was terribly out of character. Was it a mistake? I think that it was, but I don't think it was terribly out of character or out of place in the universe or any of that. Out of all the things they did with Luke, I didn't like how, and I think we should just kind of take it character by character to best get through this, but Luke's character arc as a whole, I think, was a little disappointing, because we elevated him on this pedestal. We thought he was so great, but I think that the movie even pokes fun at that, because they say, "Oh, I was Luke Skywalker, a legend," and look where that got me. So I think that that's kind of a message in and of itself. So, what did you think, Ed, about the overall character arc then of Luke? I know I kind of hijacked your original point, but what did you think of the overall character arc of Luke and kind of the stylistic choices and that Kylo Ren confrontation? I think that the characters in this were the most appealing and the most, worthy to talk about. So, as we get into that, what did you think about Luke?
I agree with you on all of that, really, to be honest. I agree that This movie really highlighted, especially with Luke, that he's just a guy. He's just a guy from Tatooine, if we're being honest. And he became a legend. Uh, but he's still a person. And the fact that he made mistakes, I think, was both necessary in a way, because, I mean, where you go from there? I mean, you wouldn't have a first order if you just kept going up on that trajectory in a way. It was kind of necessary. But at the same time, it really deepened his character. I mean, it turned him from a potential messiah to, you know, someone you could really learn from, because, you know, no one's perfect. And failure's where we usually learn from, honestly, because you don't innovate, you don't do anything new, you don't really grow as a person if you don't have to change anything to overcome adversity. Now, I do agree, though, it was kind of, I don't know, stunted. It was kind of abrupt in a way. I expected there to be more with that, but again, the Legend of Luke was such a huge thing that,
I mean, it
with
was a
the
huge
fact
thing
that,
to us. It was a big thing to us.
yeah,
It's a big thing to the fans. The
yeah,
legend of Luke Skywalker. I mean, does it get any better than that? And it's built up for so long to be this thing, and now it's here, and we're disappointed, and fans are mad about that. But I think that was the point.
I think it was, to be honest. And in a way, too, like every beginning has an end in a way. And I think the way they ended it, while bittersweet and very abrupt with how he just became one with the Force again, it was honestly, if I look back on that, probably the best way they could have done it. Because if he was killed by someone, I mean, man, would people really freak out about that. And it's also, like for a Jedi Master to become one with the Force, I mean, that's the way to go in my mind. Now, speaking of my earlier topic, like about Kylo and that interaction, the Force in general, I agree. With the fact that with him being human, can you really fault Luke for just for that split second? And I mean, you're right. The Phantom's got to figure that out. But I find it very interesting because we talked about how the Jedi view is very narrow, especially at the height of their power, and the Force is beyond it all in a way. And I think Luke figured that out in his character arc in a way too, as he taught Rey. Because when you think about it, especially in the prequels, you see that the Jedi are very narrow-minded. They're very monk-like. They have a set thing, a set principles, you could say, and you can't stray at all, or else you're gonna go to this dark side. It's gonna be wrong. And the fact that he made this mistake and was still a person, still a Jedi in a way, and he was still there, and he still made the right choice at the end of the movie, I think is profound. And I think that's one reason he could become one with the Force, is because he, in a sense, recommuned with it.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I agree with that point. And so we should, I don't know how long we've been talking about this point, but I think we should start talking about the other character arcs. What do you think?
True. I mean, I think that Luke was a big one to get out of the way, and just a big thing to get on, get out of the way. And so let's get off Act 2 for a while. Basically, the way we're going to take the rest of this podcast, Luke, I think, takes up the most amount of time, and then probably Kylo next. We'll see where it goes. We're just having fun here, and we're glad you're along for the ride. But we're going to kind of just continue talking about characters, and then we'll talk about kind of scenes at the end and that kind of stuff, the Yoda scene and the Luke fight scene and all that. We'll get into the scene specifically closer to the end here. But, as we kind of move on with characters, I think that for me, the next logical talking point, since we talked about Luke's confrontation with Kylo, is Kylo. And hot take from me, I think this is the best acted Star Wars movie ever. The originals are so good, but they're good for their special effects, for their direction, for their editing, and the actors are great. And don't get me wrong, but I think that the acting doesn't set that movie apart as exceptional, whereas I think the acting in The Last Jedi really does. And I think that Adam Driver, with his portrayal of Kylo Ren, just steals the show. I mean, I thought that was awesome. I mean, he's by far the most complex Star Wars villain in my, in my estimation, because Darth Vader, yeah, okay, we learn about him in the prequels and we understand his motivations, but I don't think he's that complex. And I think Kylo is just, he has so many layers to him, so much complexity, and we just learn more about him. And at the end, I kind of root for him as a villain, which I've never done before, because the bad guys are clearly evil, and I think Kylo Ren is definitely evil. We'll get into this, but I don't think there's a redemption arc in it for him now, after 8. But I think he's still like a likable villain almost, because you understand where he's coming from, you understand why he is the way he is. Whereas I don't think you quite got that quite as much from the other characters. I think they really mishandled Anakin to Darth transition in Episode 3. But I thought the Adam Driver's performance as Kylo was exceptional. I thought Mark Hamill's performance as Luke Skywalker was also just so good. But in any case, Kylo, he's got this character arc at the end of 7. Okay, we don't really know what to expect from him, I think, because he was this kind of teeny, emo, kind of violent teen guy, and then we don't know what's going to happen to him because Snoke says, all right, bring him over, we're going to complete his training. And, he's just even that much more conflicted in this movie, and Snoke even says it. He says, it split your spirit in two, and you killed your father, it didn't strengthen you like you thought. And we just see this conflict, especially when he connects with Rey. We can just see this conflict within him. Rey even confides in him as a friend instead of Luke. The scene where she's sitting at that fire after going into that dark place and asking about her parents, she's sitting at the fire, and I thought she was talking to Luke about this because, Luke talked to Yoda about it. And I'm like, okay, she's talking to Luke. This is progression here. She was talking to Kylo Ren. I mean, she was talking to the main villain, the guy she hates, the guy she's supposed to be fighting, and she's confiding in him about maybe one of the most vulnerable moments of her life up to that point. So I think what they did there was great with the characters, but then, Kylo Ren's progression and arc is just something of cinematic beauty, I think. I thought it was great. You can see his motivations as the movie progresses, that he is conflicted. And then in that throne room fight scene, which we'll talk about the scene later, we think he turns back to the light, but then he really is still evil. He just wants to have no one in his way. And he might not love the First Order, but he really, 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 really doesn't love the Resistance. So he kind of wants to make it in his own image, and now he can do that with the First Order in Episode 9, I'm sure. And he asks Rey to join him in something that is so Episode 3-esque in such a good way, in my opinion. He really harkens back to, man, he's really like Anakin, he's really like that. So I think that they do a lot to establish that familial tie in terms of his personality. I think that the character portrayal is great by Adam Driver, and I thought that the arc was so believable and so, I mean, it really tears at you, in my opinion. And I think that this was probably the strongest point of the film, was Kylo Ren and Rey, his foil. But what are your thoughts, Ed? Because I could go on about Kylo Ren forever, just because I thought what they did was so great. But what is your opinion on Kylo Ren in this movie?
I think he is honestly probably the most complex character of not only this movie, or even this trilogy. I agree, he's the most complex villain. And I think that goes hand in hand in a way with this trilogy's kind of muddying of the waters. Good versus evil is not necessarily black and white anymore. Like, for instance, with Kylo, why he's so rich in character in a way is he still wants to do the right thing, but he goes about it the wrong ways. Because I
have to interrupt. I mean, he's not a good guy, and I don't think he's trying to do the right thing. I really don't. I mean, I think he's trying to establish his own aims. He's trying to do his thing, but I don't think it's the right thing.
Right. as far as that goes, right might be too strong a word, but when you think about it, in a way, he wants stability. He's never really had that. He
That's true.
wants
That's true.
he wants order. And when you think about it, the First Order and the Empire in general, if you looked at it at just a very surface level, is its order, everything's in its box, everything's, quote unquote, safe, and that, like, there isn't going to be like a heel face, you're not going to wake up and you're going to see your master there to kill you. You're not going to get that unexpected, emotional knife in the gut. I mean, it's all very cut and dry in a way. And so it's the reason I say the right thing, the wrong way, in a sense, is he's trying to, in a sense, protect himself and others in a way. But, I mean, freedom in exchange for security is a age-old debate going back to Hobbes and Locke in real life. But so that's why I can say, something like that, because in a way, he is trying to, I guess, make it a quote-unquote better world, but that doesn't make it right.
Nah, I disagree. I just don't think that's... He's not trying to do the right thing. He's trying to provide that stability and that order that he lacked in his life, that he felt wanting in his life. Han Solo was, I guess, an absentee father from what we know, and Leia, kind of shipped him off to Luke and said, well, he can deal with you now. So I think he's just really just kind of lashing out and trying to let the past die and kill it if he has to. I think that's what he's going for. I mean, he's not. He's not trying to do the right thing. He just isn't. I mean, he's going for that order, that stability, that easy way out kind of thing.
I agree. It is an easy way out, and partially that's because that's what he wants and kind of what he knows with his training and his exposure to the First Order. But I guess what I was trying to say is, in his own view, with his own experiences, that is the right way. From an outside perspective.
Yeah,
I mean, we know it's the wrong way, but right. Like when he's like, we can join me, Ray. We can do this in our own image, and we can do it this way. We can make it better than it was in the past. Like, let the past go. In a way, so it is kind of like the Join Me moment, episode 5 and things like that. But the connotation, I think, is ever so slightly different in that he's not quite as... I almost said evil, but he is evil in a way. But
he's not. You're right. He's not quite as evil. He's not the scary guy behind the mask of Darth Vader, and he's not the sadistic narcissist. Just, I'm gonna destroy the galaxy, Palpatine. I mean, he's not. You're right. I mean, he's not that guy.
Yeah, and so I guess that's why I'm why I came up with that conflict. But you're also right in that what he's doing is wholly wrong from an outside perspective. And so you mentioned Rey as a foil, so I think we should start talking about her arc and her perspective on all this, because that foil is a great way to not only look at as a character, but also to contrast to right. Kylo.
Well, and I think that for me, Rey kind of starts to go a little dark side. That when she was at the Falcon, she reached out and touched the water and was just kind of like, this is cool, because she grew up on a desert planet, which I thought was a really cool, subtle character moment for her. But then she basically gets this forced time call from Kylo that you can never, I guess, press the decline button on. You can never ignore those. And so this like serene moment where she's just, happy is just interrupted by Kylo, this monster. And she's going off at him, and I think Daisy Ridley just delivered these lines so good. And she's saying, I know everything I need to know. I know everything that that you did. I know what happened. I am resolute in this knowledge. She just thinks that she knows it, and she's angry, and she's so like fired up about it. And in contrast, in that scene, Kylo is a little bit like, oh, did he tell you? Did he tell you what happened? He's the more emotionally in check one. So I think that they kind of paint that picture early to kind of be like, whoa, like what, what's going on here? But as the movie goes on, I think that Rey, I do think that her character development was a bit lacking just because Luke didn't teach her all that much. And so she didn't, um, she didn't progress as much. She didn't emerge a much more wise person after Octo. But I think that does speak volumes to her character because while she had these moments of anger or whatever it was, I think there was maybe created doubt by the way they shot some of the scenes and the delivery of some of her lines. But if you just look at her character from an exterior perspective, I don't think that there ever really is a doubt that she's going to do the right thing. She's going to go help Finn. She's going to go help the Resistance. She's going to go help Leia. I mean, she has, and I identify with Rey because I have a very strong moral compass, I feel. So she always, even though maybe she gets angry about this or that, or she wonders about this or that every once in a while, I think that her moral compass is so true. She always is resolute and is always going to go try and do that right thing. And so she tries to go turn Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. She fights with him. And when he offers her the galaxy, just like Anakin, when Kylo says we can, do what we want, and right before that, the revelation about her parents is revealed, which we'll talk about later again. But so he even says, "You're nothing in the story, but you're something to me." I mean, I think that's all Rey ever wanted in her life was to be somebody. And Kylo's offering her the easy way. He's offering her that chance. And she just immediately says, don't do this, which was such a great line delivery. It said so much about Rey as a character, so much about the movie as a whole. She was always resolute. And I think that while her character on the surface really, in my opinion, didn't progress that much in terms of she didn't learn a lot of new Force abilities, her personality never really changed. But I think that at the end of the day, that sense of right and wrong that she has was that much more reinforced to us, the viewer.
Yeah, I agree with you there. She didn't really progress all that much. And she has always been the most steadfast character, which I found an interesting choice. It's kind of like they flip-flopped the personality types we expected with the Sith and the Jedi perspectives. And, once again, a very interesting choice. Now, the interesting thing from a development standpoint, though, is, you mentioned Rey being darker, and I agree with that. And it'll be interesting because I don't know how, straight her path is going to be. Because both her and Kylo are very determined. Because Kylo's kind of found his own, reason, his own goal now. It's not Snoke telling him what to do. It's not Luke trying to shape him. It's Kylo now, on his own, making the choices. So, in a sense, he's grown the most. And so now they're both, he and Rey, from a foil perspective, like at the starting gate. They both know what they want to do, and they're both directly opposed, and they're both in a position of influence. And so the question now, in my mind, is how far is she willing to go? Because at Act 2, she went into that, the dark side hole, the dark ground, when, which is something like Luke would never want her to do, and use horrify and things like that. And the reason I bring that up, again, is it shows that she's not going to let what other people tell her stop her from doing what she needs to do. In a sense, she's not afraid of the past, and that was a big thing of this. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the conventions that we expect from Star Wars may not apply to her.
Right. In a sense of, so Ed, and this is a big point that's been brought up by a lot of people. Now that Luke's dead, kind of it's a changing of the guard. The old guard is dead, and we know that maybe the Jedi weren't correct about everything, and we kind of have this new Star Wars now. You're right, she's not beholden to those old conventions. No one's telling her what her destiny is. which is so unique for a Star Wars movie. And I think that's what made the other ones shine, is you knew where these characters were going. You knew the showdown. You knew what their destiny was, and you wanted to see it all play out. Rey gets to choose her own path, which I think is going to be fascinating in 9, and I think was set up great in this movie. Because what is she going to do? You know, she gets to choose her own path. No one's telling her what her destiny is. You know, she doesn't have a blood right to take down Kylo Ren. You know, she's nobody, we find out. You know, she gets to do what she wants. She gets to chart her own path and make her own destiny, which I think was an interesting character choice. I get why a lot of people disagree with it, and I also get why people were disappointed with Rey's parents. I was, for sure, because that's an easy way to explain why she was so strong in the Force if she was like Luke's kid, but stylistically, I feel like it made sense, even though I was let down, and I was in the theater with my uncle who's watched all the Star Wars movies, saw the originals in theaters. He was just like, what? You know, in the movie. I mean, I could see his body language when they revealed that Rey's parents were nobody. You know, he was let down. But like I said, I think stylistically, you know, the fact that she gets to choose her own destiny sets up for something very tantalizing. But is she just going to fight Kylo Ren? You know, is that just going to be her destiny? Is it going to be telegraphed for us like that? You know, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think whatever it's going to be a lot murkier and a lot less clean than we expect. I think there's going to be choices she makes that are not going to be what we expect her to make in 9. And, I mean, the very end, maybe it'll be, you know, like what we would expect, you know, the good person to do. But along the way, I think she's going to do something that's going to make us go, huh? And so I'm interested to see what they do with that, because you're right. The uncertainty makes it a new kind of expectation with Star Wars, which is cool, because when you look back to the original trilogy, like when it just came out, we had no idea what, you know, Luke's parentage. We just thought he was a plucky guy from a sandy nowhere that could go and rise up and through grit and determination and some help along the way, go and oppose the evil empire. And then in 5, in a way, they lost it, because he's like, Darth Vader said, Luke, I am your father. And
No, he said, I am your father. He said, no, I am your father. That was the line. That's the actual line.
Yep, and that's where you can tell the difference in our fandom between Eddie and I. So thank you so much for correcting me. I'm really glad, because one, I bet a lot of other people pointed out. So thank you. I'm eager to learn about Star Wars.
All 5 people watching the podcast. Thanks. Shout out to all 5 of you.
So where's it going? Oh yeah. But what I mean though is, in a way, especially with the prequels, like, you knew Luke had this destiny. Like, he was destined for greatness in a way. Like, it was just kind of, you know, so it was less him in a way and more of, you know, a setup from the prequels or from Darth Vader. You're like, oh, he is strong, but his father's really strong, and it's a family thing. And they kind of emphasized this in, you know, 7 and 8 with Leia, and, you know, and it being a family, you know, the Force is in the family. You can't escape it in a way. But what's interesting with Rey is she's literally the nobody that we thought Luke was when 4 came out. Granted, I'm not old enough to remember that, but it means that she is literally the folk hero. She is the person, she's the everyman, the everywoman, the neighbor, the literal, you know, embodiment of the resistance in a way. She's just a girl. And
I think that's a great point.
So, speaking of Leia, what did you think? Especially that starship scene. Anyone who's seen the movie knows exactly what I'm talking about. What were your thoughts on that when she was outside the starship and used the Force?
Well, I think to address Leia, and you know, we've been going on for 54 minutes now, so I promise it'll get shorter from here, because everyone else we're going to talk about had a lesser role and was less exciting to talk about, I think. But I think Carrie Fisher, you know, the late Carrie Fisher, rest in peace. I think that her performance in 7 was bad. I think it was robotic, and I just think that you could tell she hadn't acted in, you know, 25 years or however long it was. but I thought her performance in 8 was much improved. I thought that she really put in the time and effort, and props to her for sure. She really put in the time and effort to deliver a great performance, as did the other actors. As I'm kind of trying to reinforce my hot take here that this is the best acted Star Wars movie. Um, but I thought that Leia as a character, I don't think she had a lot of progression, nor did she need to. We're already comfortable with Leia, and Leia's already comfortable in her own skin. So I think that what they did with the character was good as a whole. Obviously, with Carrie Fisher's death, that complicates matters. Everyone was expecting them to somehow kill her off in this film. And obviously, if you take it scene by scene, it was easy to do that with blowing the bridge up, but obviously she appears in a lot later scenes in the movie, so that's tough to just write her out there. And we'll kind of talk about more of our predictions for 9 and kind of our questions later. But in this particular movie, in a vacuum, I thought Carrie Fisher was great. I thought Leia didn't need a lot of character progression, but we still got it in terms of she's a grizzled veteran, a seasoned general. And I really like, we're going to talk about Poe's arc. I really like how she tells Poe, you can't shoot everything and expect to win. That's not always the right way. We can tell that she's kind of a cut above. She's got the brains, she's got the intelligence. This is a strong woman, which is important. I think strong female leads are fantastic. Strong woman at the helm here, doing the best she can. And I think, and they brought this up, Mr. Sunday Movies brought it up in his podcast. I think that the idea of her coming back from space, the bridge gets blown up, everyone dies but her, she brings herself back from space with this strong, powerful depiction of the Force. That she has the Force. She's been practicing something or other, obviously, because she never uses the Force ever in another Star Wars movie. I think that in theory that was a great idea and it was awesomely, conceived, but in execution, that scene doesn't really hold up for me. I don't have as big a problem with it as anyone else. I certainly don't think it was, it didn't ruin the movie. It wasn't horrible, but it just struck me as maybe a little bit not believable. So I mean that's my thoughts on Leia. I thought the character progression was good. We definitely get to see that she is a great general and has those years of experience. And we'll talk about that scene. I guess we can just talk about it now because it's just very integral to Leia as a character in this movie. But we'll talk about more of the scenes later. But that's kind of what I thought about the scene really and about Leia really.
Yeah, I had similar thoughts. I think she did a great job overall in the movie. That scene, I watch a lot of sci-fi movies, so whenever someone gets blown out in space, I kind of go, huh, shouldn't they, have their eyes boil or something like that? Because they're in a vacuum, there's no air, it's absolute zero, and it's absolute nasty. But that's just me as a viewer. But in general, I don't think it broke the movie's continuity or anything like that. Obviously, I think it was a little gratuitous in a way and kind of reeked of plot armor because it's of course, she's not the one who dies. It's kind of like a gotcha moment almost.
Right, because everyone was expecting her to die.
Right, and then she just kind of oh nope, I got this, and then she goes back, and then she's in the hospital, part of the ship, and just oh okay. So, I mean, it seemed extra in a way. I mean, they could have done it a lot worse. And so, I mean, it was extra, but they could have definitely flubbed it. And they didn't flub it. So, and that, in my mind, that's okay. That they at least didn't botch it. As badly as I feel like some people think. Now, and you mentioned the years of experience. So, I think now's a good time to talk about Poe. Because, I mean, Rey and Kylo are foils, and and they're the in conflict through this movie. But the sub conflict, in a way, I think of this movie is we talk about generations, old and new guard. It's Poe and the idealistic, trigger happy new people in the Resistance versus the old guard, Leia and some of her older experienced people. And I think that's a really big, although not quite as showy part of this movie, because this movie really goes and, you know, dissects in a way what the resistance is, how they do things, what their ideology is. And I think that's important. So we talked, very briefly, just saying that the opening act of the movie was really, and by opening act, I just mean the scene where they evacuate the base at the beginning. There really isn't a lot to see there. And I agree. I mean, the one thing in there that I think is important from a character arc perspective is when Poe is insubordinate to Leia. And he's like, no, we can do this. We can blow up the Dreadnought. It's a fleet killer. And he's all trigger happy short term, and she's long term. She's like, we can leave. We don't need to do it. We can get him another day. Which in my mind plays to the Resistance's strength, because you can't hit what isn't there. And so they're just small, death by 1,000 cuts. And I think Poe, and a lot of the idealistic people, it's like the power of heart. We can do this if we do it. And it shows that that's not always the answer. You can't just go and do a Death Star assault to everything. That is not the answer. You can't shoot everything and expect to win. And so that's powerful from a narrative perspective. But from Poe, that's a lesson he really needed to learn. And boy, did it take him a while. What are your thoughts?
I'm glad that you were able to get your thoughts out about Poe first before me. But I think that that was really the big takeaway from that opening scene, other than it looked cool, got you in the action, engaged the audience, all that kind of stuff from a cinematic perspective. That is big because, like Holdo mentions later, he lost the whole Resistance bombing fleet. They all died. And we could see in those cockpits of those bombers, of those fighters, those were a lot of those people were the same pilots that helped him blow up Starkiller Base. So, I mean, these are seasoned people, these are valuable, like Poe says, they were heroes. And then Leia says that, well, they're dead heroes, they're no good to us now. And I think that's really big because, those guys were they weren't just a green recruit. Those were seasoned pilots. They were heroes, and Poe put their lives at risk. And yes, they destroyed the Dreadnought, but they really had almost all their numbers decimated by that attack. And I think that it does. I think that Poe does learn that at the end of the movie. It's not in your face at you, like, oh, guys, I've learned that we can't just shoot stuff. But in that scene on Crate where Luke is out there and he's going to fight, and Finn, because Kylo sends him on this mission, Poe sends him on this mission, and he's going to, take out the base, and, Finn kind of, I think, still has that shoot stuff mentality, especially since, we'll talk about Finn's character arc, at that point in the movie, Finn is fully committed to the Resistance. He's not just doing it because he wants to run from the First Order. He likes the Resistance and the cause now. But anyway, Poe at that moment says, wait, we don't need to help Luke. I see the bigger picture here. I see what's going on here. Luke is stalling for us to leave. Let me use my brain. Let's think a way out of this instead of let's shoot a way out of this, which is big for him as a character. I'm really excited. I do kind of hope that I kind of hope that he takes over the General Leia role. But at the same time, I really like seeing him shoot stuff in an X-Wing. So, I don't know how I want them to handle that, because I love him shooting stuff and he's a great pilot. But I feel like he has learned that lesson by the end of the movie. He has that acumen built up where he can lead now instead of just be a trigger-happy guy who's charismatic and gets people to follow him. He's a true leader by the end of the film.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I just found it interesting how they had to basically give him 3 chances, and the third time he got it, because with the ship scene, and it could have been handled so much better from a communication problem. Communication broke down on that cruiser. That's what I attribute that whole bit with the transports at Crate, is just poor communication. But even then, he just kind of was short fuse. But you're right, he learned his lesson by the end of the movie, and I am interested to see where he goes. I think from an inertial perspective, as in like where his ship is sailing in a way, they're going to make him more of a leadership role just because then he can't shoot things. He has to watch people put their lives on the line, and he can't be there. And I think that's the biggest way to make him really grow as a character. So I'm eager to see if they'll give him that kind of emotional adversity.
He's destined
Um,
for middle management. That's what you're telling me. They're sending him
I,
up to middle management. He'll be stuck there forever.
middle management, or maybe even the top by the end of nine. But at that point, he's not the guy in the front line. He's got to watch his buddies die. He can't do a thing. And I think that's where he's going. This movie's definitely, these movies are definitely darker. So I could definitely see him doing it. Um, and so I'm curious to see how that goes. And you mentioned Finn. And I agree, Finn hasn't really matured as much through this movie. But from a mental standpoint, like he's very much like a short-term kind of guy, like gotta solve this problem, gotta go to the next problem, and he hasn't looked like Poe's starting to get with the long-term, hey, let's live to fight another day. But I think from Finn's character progression standpoint, he's grown leaps and bounds, psychologically. And what I mean by that versus like long-term thinking, short-term thinking, I just mean from a personality standpoint, because when you think about it, when we're introduced to him in seven, he's brainwashed, and then he's gone through the psychological impressment to be a stormtrooper, and it breaks. It's his first mission, and that's where, and he doesn't know really who he is or what he wants, and it's very much fight or flight instinct. It is very kind of like a basic thought goal, and as he's progressed through both seven and eight, he's become more and more complex from like a emotional need want, from a goal standpoint. And so by the end, he chooses his own cause, like you mentioned. And I think that's such a powerful thing for him and for the movies in general, because he's not exactly forced into it. He knows what he's getting himself into. And so I think that's a very powerful arc if it was on the back burner. From a screen time and kind of like an importance standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. I mean, the points we're saying are good, and I think his character arc was good, but I think, like I said, I rewatched seven after watching eight. John Boyega, and I don't think it's his fault. Like, he plays a way better Finn, and like Finn is so much more charismatic and likable. I mean, he's very likable in eight, don't get me wrong, but he is so much better in seven. Like, episode seven, Finn, like, I love that guy. Like, can we go to the bar together? Can we be like, can we be best friends? Episode eight, Finn, I mean, he's fine, but he's like the same Finn, except what you touched on, and that was a very great point. I thought about how he was a very short term thinker, and this kind of says, he's committing, he's setting himself up. Basically, he was committed to Rey in eight, and that was his loyalty was to Rey. It wasn't to the Resistance. It wasn't to Poe. It wasn't to these other people he'd been friends with along the way. And Poe got him out of the Star Destroyer, saved his dang life, and he's still all about Rey. But I just think that he was better. Finn was better in seven as a whole, and he did learn and he did progress as a character. And I thought that arc was okay in terms of high level, but I do have a lot of problems with the Canto Bite sequence. So it was a good character arc, but I think that, and it was definitely on the back burner, and I think you could tell. So it was okay, but it was just missing something for me.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I guess I tend to look at kind of like the idea versus the execution, kind of when I ramble and think about movies. And so, yeah, that whole Canto Bite sequence, I agree. It's just kind of like a side trip from the movie in a way. I mean, if you think about it, if they talked on the cruiser, just Resistance chain of command wise, Poe wouldn't have had to send them to Canto Bite in the first place. It was just a big, red herring.
Yeah,
And
I don't fault him for doing it, and I don't fault them for going based on the information we as an audience had and the information they as characters had. I think that was, I think that given their circumstances, that I don't fault them for sending them. But you're right, the way in which they found themselves in those circumstances was a little questionable. Like that problem seemed a little too solvable to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like they needed the time in the movie to fill, and they needed Finn to go on a quest or to develop or do something. He can't sit on the ship the whole time. They said, "Oh, what can we make him do?" It seemed kind of superficial because I mean, if you think about it, the Resistance, they've been doing this a while. You'd think that they'd be, just be, calmly go and be like, "Okay, we're gonna cloak the transports. There's a base here," because unless they were absolutely paranoid about someone being on the ship with them.
Which they could have
But
been, which makes sense to me. I'm on board. But they never once said anything about it. They never once said, "Oh, well, we're very concerned for our intelligence. There could be a mole on the ship." That's never mentioned. They never say that. So while that's believable, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I don't think the average viewer would pick up on that. That's something that we're retconning in as fans to fill up a bad plot point.
I agree, it was a bad plot point. I mean, if you really want to dissect it, they weren't. They were sure they were scot free because the Empire wouldn't be there when they jumped the first time if they were sure they didn't have anybody on the ship. So they wouldn't have needed hyperspace tracking.
True.
I mean,
True.
so
True.
I mean, they just didn't really think it through. I think they just kind of put it in there.
So as we get to Canto Bite and all that, I mean, we have to talk about Finn's sidekick in this, Rose. And I thought the actress that played Rose, and maybe that's because I saw her in some other like interviews or something. I thought she was cool. I thought she was good, and I thought her character portrayal was fine. I like her as an actress now. I might have to go watch another movie or two that she's in. I think she was spunky. I think she had a lot of spunk. So I do like Rose from that point, but I think that she, as well as Finn, just suffers overall from Canto Bite, which we'll talk about that whole sequence a bit later as we kind of try and wrap this up. We're basically at the end of our characters now, I would say. But I think that her character was cool, and I liked her from the beginning. I thought her introduction was actually cool because she tases Finn, and that was cool. Um, but on Canto Bite, with the character progression, you can see a little bit of her motivations and see why she's there, but she doesn't strike me. Well, I like the actress and I like the portrayal, and I just don't think that her character was very complex. And I guess I get her motivations. I know I guess she grew up on a poor mining planet or something, so I get it, but something was missing for me there, despite the fact that the character fits in the Star Wars universe. The actress who portrayed her was good. I think that she just suffers a little bit from the storyline there, so I mean, you can kind of expand on that if you want, Ed, but then I'm also going to just kind of get into, controversial scenes and things in the movie. We did touch on Octo. We'll circle around back to that, but now since we're talking about Finn, we're talking about Rose. The Canto Bite scene to me, and I didn't think about it until I read it online, but now, now I'm kind of thinking about it. Canto Bite seems very prequel-y to me. It seems very episode 2 when they're kind of in that bar in Coruscant, maybe. I just came up with that just now. I did not read that online. Points to me for original thought, I guess. But I think that it did feel a little prequelsy to me, and Canto Bite I think felt a little bit too much like Earth when they were going through the streets. So Canto Bite, I think that going there was okay. I think that the major criticism from fans is they go on this whole mission. It was okay, I guess, and then it fails. The Canto Bite mission fails, and then it actually ends up doing harm because Benicio del Toro's character sells them out. DJ, I think, is his name. So they're like, okay, well, this kind of took away from the main storyline. This was definitely on the back burner, and it didn't end up with anything. Like, it didn't result in anything. So Canto Bite was okay for me, and then it ties into that the Jedi janitor, as people are calling him at the end, which we'll talk about as we talk about the end of the movie. But Canto Bite for me, and feel free to just interject or interrupt at any point, Ed, was just kind of, it was there, it was okay, but the storyline was okay. I just don't know what to say about it other than it was okay.
Yeah, in my mind, the parts where this movie kind of, I wouldn't say suffers, that's too strong a word, but like the dips in this movie, like on and its ups and downs, seem to be. I mean, like the central theme of this movie was Luke, it was Rey, it was Kylo,
Well,
and then it
failure, I
just.
think, is the central theme, which we haven't
Well, I
even
mean,
talked
well
about
that's a
failure.
theme, right? I guess, but what I meant was like a from a conflict standpoint, from a character conflict, because we're talking kind of off of characters. Is I guess like our spotlight was on Kylo and Snoke because Snoke is such a key part of Kylo's development, and it was Rey and Luke, and then therefore interaction either together or by proxy. Um, but and so from a time thing though, they needed something else in a way, and so when it like Canto Bite and some of the other areas we've alluded to as feeling kind of flat or kind of like they didn't quite touch, it's almost like they needed to fill time. Because, I mean, if you think about it, if everything went the way that, you know, like if they thought about it or they communicated a little bit better, like if they were just really, just on the ball with it, the transports would have gone to Crate and the Empire wouldn't have caught it. The cruiser would have been blown up and it would have been, oh, where'd the rebel scum go? And nobody would know. And that'd be the end of the movie. I mean, it'd be like what,
Yeah, I
40
mean
minutes shorter?
yeah, I mean
I mean,
that's
yeah, it'd be like, gosh darn. And so, and then Kylo would probably, depending on how it works, because you could actually still have Kylo's arcs and Snoke's arcs. I mean, the only part you would miss was Luke's little bit at the end, but everything else from their arcs would still fit. Weirdly enough, like it was almost like you could make that a short film or a much more concise film. And so, and
you could probably cut some out of that sequence.
right, well, I mean, what I mean is like Finn's arc and Rose's arc and the bit on Crate. In my mind, it's like they reached a point. It's just like, oh, we need to have Finn have development. They kind of put that in, and you're like, oh wait, if we get to the end, you know, and they just what's going to stop them from just they go to Crate. What's going to stop the Empire from just going on? It's like, oh, the Empire has to figure it out somehow. So you kind of it justifies the Canto Bite scene. I don't know what came first. I don't have the information, but in a way, you could look at it as it all sets up the non, four character progressions in a way. Like the rest of the movie is justified with these back burner things. And so it's almost like it was extra. Like you can tell that they had one sequence and they had another sequence and they just kind of put them together. And so, like, the main one that people really focused on was Rey. And I think they did a much more polished job with that. I guess you could call it the Force storyline versus the Resistance storyline with Finn and Rose. And I mean, they both do. I mean, even like I said, the Canto Bight and things like that, they do an okay job in general with the characters' progression. From the beginning to the end with Poe and Finn and things like that. It just doesn't come off as polished. It kind of comes off as like a little extra, a little just kind of put.
Poe arc wasn't polished. I thought the Poe arc was good.
Well, okay, the Poe arc was good. I'll give. I agree with that.
And I think
Of the
The Finn and Rose arc ties into the Poe arc because in Star Wars we've always seen these characters succeed. We've always seen our heroes succeed. They've always succeeded in their plans, and you're like, all right, like this is another Star Wars plan. Like this is gonna work. Like the reasoning behind that is well thought out. You're like, all right, I'm on board. I get this. I understand. And then DJ hacks him into the room, and you're like, all right, it's right there. Like they got this. They got this. Let's go, fam. This is a Star Wars movie. And then you got Poe there ready to jump to hyperspace, and you're like, this is fine. Like I don't care that he did a mutiny. Like this all makes sense to me. This seems rational. And then they fail. And then that's why a lot of people have a problem with it. But I think that is actually the redeeming quality of the Canto Bite sequence because they do fail. And I thought that was so great. Like, I am, like, getting hype over here, Ed. Like, I thought that was so cool that they fail.
Oh yeah,
the heroes fail. And you're like, this is not Empire Strikes Back. Like, I do not know what is going on. Like, I do not know where this is going. Like they failed. Like that doesn't happen in a Star Wars movie, and it did.
Oh yeah, they definitely needed that.
So I thought that part was great, but how they got there, like we said, not as great. So it had redeeming quality at the end, but maybe not so exceptional. How did you feel about the Yoda scene in this? As we move on here, how did you feel about the Yoda sequence?
I thought the Yoda sequence was good. Um, I think in a way it kind of needed to happen because if you look at it, Luke is he's the Yoda of the story. Besides Yoda and the Yoda sequence, in a way, he's the guy who's been there. He's the guy who's done that. He's the old guard. And so when he needs the wake up call, when he needs someone that he can, he's kind of lost. I mean, he is lost actually through this. So when he needs someone to really basically shore up his thinking and kind of give him guidance, Yoda was there. And I think they needed something like that because he was stuck in a rut and he was kind of coming free, but like that was the push he needed. Um, I found it interesting. I don't know if you caught this, but in the Falcon at the end, they had the books from the first Jedi Temple
Yes, I
in the
did.
drawer.
I did not catch it upon first viewing, but I read it on Reddit, and my uncle caught it. He caught it right away, and he like tapped me on the shoulder, and he's like, "Where have we seen those before?" And I'm like, "Oh man, like points for my uncle Mike over me." But yeah, I thought the Yoda scene was good. I thought the puppet. People have issues with the puppet. My initial reaction when they initially panned to it was, yeah, I mean, it's better than episode one Yoda, for sure. That thing was horrible. But, you know, it was it was good. But then as he like moved around and they got like some different lighting on him, oh my god, like it was like I was taken back to Dagobah. That was great. So good scene there. The big scene, and this is the scene that I really want to talk about to kind of wrap the podcast up. I want to talk about the throne room scene with Kylo and Rey, and that's kind of what I want to end with, Ed. Besides, our brief discussion about the ending of the movie. So, is there any other scenes that you think we should really kind of get in depth here before to that one?
Honestly, there isn't really a scene to go into, but I have to say, one thing I thought was really cool because we mentioned the Yoda puppet and how like it kind of brought us back to episode 5 and that feeling with that, and like the original trilogy Yoda and things like that. What I found really cool was if you looked at Akbar's eyes on the bridge, they got the whole fisheye effect.
Oh
I like
yeah.
fishing in my free time, and so they updated uh, his character model, I think, just with how they did that. I'm pretty sure it was a physical effect. And so when he turns his head and you see the eye get light on it, it looks just like a fisheye. And I thought that was a brilliant little detail they did because it was just like, oh my gosh, it was that little detail that kind of makes it. So it seems much more, I guess, realistic, much more real. So shout out to the prop department, to the costume department for doing that because it's those little things that fans notice that really make a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you feel like you're in it that much more. So let's get
Mm-hmm.
to, in my opinion, the climax. Well, I don't. We have to talk about the Luke scene though. Oh man, the Luke scene. Okay, so end of Luke's character arc. Let's go. We gotta breeze through this because we've been talking forever. This is it. It's getting good right now. I'm gonna put this in the description. If you haven't stayed with us, come back to us. Like I hype level 9,000 here. Like let's go. So to close out Luke's character arc, this guy he's being hard to work with. I mean, I understand it. I can understand it. I'm just ragging on him right now. I totally understand. Go back in the podcast if you didn't get up to this point. Um, Luke's character arc good, but I thought it was good, but then it was very lackluster right up until the end, and you're just like, all right, Luke Skywalker gets to be a bad ass right now. Forgive my language. This is usually a kid friendly podcast, but that had to be said. Luke just gets that moment. He gets that hero moment. He comes back, and the first time I watched a movie, I did not realize, which I thought was great. I did not realize that he wasn't actually there. I did immediately recognize that he was using the old lightsaber, and I'm like, Rey and Kylo just split that thing in two. How do you have that? So I knew something was up, but I didn't know if he just constructed a replica or what was going on with that. So I didn't know that he was not there. So that was great for me. But he gets that moment at the end, and everyone shoots at him. and I love it. He just walks out and does that little shoulder brush, and I'm just like, this. I mean, that was great. You know, this is the Luke Skywalker we all expected. Was this one on Crate, and then he doesn't lightsaber duel Kylo, which, you know, if he's force projecting, I guess maybe he can't do that. But I would have liked to see, you know, a little clash there. But it was just so cool how they did that. And then he just flies through Luke with the saber and it doesn't go through him. And I was like, oh, shoot. Like, that's a cool force power. But, like, Luke is still there. Like, it wasn't until the very end when it was like, oh, he's not there. And that was just so, that was a great creative choice they made. I just thought it was awesome. You know, Luke got that redeeming moment where he's like, all right, I'm in this. You know, I got to do what I can to make this fight go on. So, you know, I thought that scene was awesome. Like, I'll watch just that scene over and over and over again, I'm sure. So, quick thoughts, you know, as quick as you can be, Ed, on that scene before we move on to that throne room scene, because there's so much going on with that one.
Yeah, um, yeah. I'm sorry I can be so long-winded sometimes. Just Star Wars, you know. Um, so, quick thoughts. I love that scene. I think they did a great job with it. It was kind of like that Star Wars fun when he wasn't there. It was just like a gotcha in a way, and that was perfect in my mind with Kylo's reaction. And it kind of goes with the whole outthinking your opponent versus just a straight up brawl motif that was going along. Um, one thing I want to say about this, which I find very interesting, because after this scene, Luke disappears into the Force, or I guess you could say becomes one with it more aptly. And as you said, at the end of the scene we're about to talk about, Kylo and Rey end up essentially having a Force tug of war with Luke's saber, and it splits. If you look at it from symbolically, they're both fighting over, taking the mantle of his legacy in a way, with as the Force character in the movies, um, as this place in the universe, as the role of the Force in either, I guess you'd imagine, a new galactic empire or a new republic. I mean, there's a lot of symbolic weight with that. But what I find really interesting is Luke says, if you kill me, then I will always be there with you, or something along those lines. I'm terrible with paraphrasing, or with direct quotes. And so I find it interesting to see if Luke will show up in 9 through Force attachment with his lightsaber, because they're both not going to get rid of that. And so I wonder if he's going to be like, hello. And he's right. They're not going to get rid of that because she has both.
Yeah, yep. Rey has both pieces.
Oh, never mind. I thought she just had the one and Kylo had the other.
No, they could.
Okay.
A lot of people are speculating that they could show up. He could show up as a Force ghost to taunt Kylo, which I'm not on board with. And then I just didn't really think that Luke needed to die there, especially since Carrie Fisher actually dies. So I think that they could have kept him in for the next movie. But I don't have a problem with it. That shows that he really just gave the ultimate sacrifice to help out his buddies, and to help out Rey and to help out his sister, and that was such a great scene. Also, I mean, we can't end the podcast without it between him and Carrie Fisher, because she's not, she is gone. She's not with us, and Luke says all this stuff about you're never really gone, and that was just such a cool scene there with them, so that was cool. But I mean, that was a great sequence in the movie, and I think it was 100% necessary for Luke's character, for him to just not go out like a total, I don't know, he just didn't, just not go out in a bad way, I suppose. So as we get to that throne room scene, that was so hype. I mean, that gave me chills every time I watched it, and I knew what was happening in the later movies. People are mad that Snoke didn't get character development, but as we think back, neither did the Emperor until the prequels, so we don't know where that guy came from. He just kind of showed up in 6, well, a little bit in 5 as well, just kind of like, hey, I'm a bad dude, and I'm Darth Vader's boss, and I'm kind of here now, and it's like, but Darth Vader, he's like, he's the villain, so people kind of forget that because we have the prequels to look back on. I didn't mind that Snoke didn't have a backstory. I thought Snoke kind of sucked as a character. He was like a wannabe Palpatine, and he bosses Kylo around. And I think that Kylo turning that lightsaber, just the way that scene was, oh, so good. But he kills Snoke, and people are like, "What? What a terrible bad guy." But maybe that's symbolic, or not symbolic, but maybe that's an indicator of Kylo's rising power in the Force, rising darkness in him, or whatever it is. Maybe that's just Kylo is so powerful that he's superseded Snoke, and I thought that was a great scene. I thought the way that was shot was awesome. The way that Rey, her hand reaches up and she grabs the lightsaber, and then they go back to back and they're fighting, and like it was so cool. And I'm just geeking out so hard right now. I'm sure everyone can tell who's stayed with us as long. I'm geeking out right now, and like it was so cool. And then during that scene though, I was wondering, all right, what's gonna happen? How is this gonna fix itself? Is someone gonna die here? What's going on? And then as we talked about it earlier, Kylo says, "All right, join me," and you're like, you think for a split second, oh, he's brought back, he's on the light now, but he's not. He never was. He was never at. Maybe he feels the pull to the light, but he was never back to the light. He was never there. He was always just dark. He was always going to be the leader of the First Order or whatever. He wants to kind of start a new thing with Rey, which she turns him down. But he is still that bad guy doing those bad things, and that's not changing. Even if he doesn't agree with Snoke, which I understand why he wouldn't. Snoke manipulated their minds, but now he has no boss, which is cool. And then Rey in that sequence was great too. That scene just gives me chills because the anticipation and what's going to happen and just the fight sequence. I'm geeking out, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, I thought it was great too. On Snoke, I agree in a sense that he was honestly kind of a terrible character. And I agree with you in how it shows Kylo's development, but for a different reason. If you look at it, the First Order is kind of like an imitation empire. Um, they aren't the whole galaxy. Yeah, they got the tech and they've kind of looted it, but how much of the development was them and how much was before the fall? Because, like in Rogue One, there's the scene with the database of projects, and the hyperspace tracking's mentioned in there, just one line, but it sets up, this scene in 8 with the Star Destroyers tracking the Resistance. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, though, is how much of it's really their own achievement and how much of it's just modeled after the Empire? How much of is it basically a wannabe fan club? And so Snoke, in a way, is a wannabe villain. Because when you think about it, yeah, he's in charge. And I don't know, I haven't read any of the books that would maybe flesh him out. But essentially, he's like the Emperor figure. But if you think about it realistically, the Emperor was, Darth Sidious bad, the big bad. He wasn't elaborated till the prequels, but when they did elaborate on him in the prequels, it was just like, oh my gosh, he fooled the entire Jedi Order. Gosh, he's powerful. And so when you look at it from that perspective, how could somebody like Snoke exist? Because Snoke does not seem like a young person. It's only been, 20, 30 years since 6? So that's not a lot of time. And I'm sure Sidious would have done something. Unless Sidious, used him as a lackey, in which case he's less than the big bad. And he wasn't even like a main player. He was like the bench warmer or the guy, behind the curtain, but not in charge, but just like off to the side, like, get out of my way. We have big boy things to do here. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I guess where I'm going with this is with Kylo's development. Like I said, it shows his development because he's more of a real, actual, honest to goodness villain, right, because of killing him.
I agree. I agree. I think it's important to kill Snoke off because, like, we're right. He's a bad character. He's a wannabe emperor who's not. There's no reason for him to exist, and now Kylo's in charge, and that sets up a whole interesting dynamic. So, as we wrap up here, the end of the movie, I totally thought that movie was going to end when they're panning out on the Falcon. Also, speaking of, like, wide shots and pan outs, I thought that the shot with Luke and Kylo when they have that super wide, almost like panoramic shot of them as they're about to duel. Thought that was great. That's a Ryan Johnson thing, I'm told, but that was awesome. But where was I going with this? Just, I guess, closing thoughts here. Um, that scene was great. I thought the movie was going to end with that pan out, but then we kind of get this little extra bit with that kid from Canto Bight who helps Rose and Finn not get caught by the police. And he's got that resistance ring. He force pulls that broom to him, so we can tell he's force sensitive. And we get that swelling of the music, and he holds that broom out just like, he's very like Luke-esque. And then you get that music swelling, and just the movie ends. And it was just a strange way to end it. I don't hate it, but everyone is speculating because Star Wars did announce that Ryan Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, is doing a new trilogy on a yet to be named topic in the Star Wars universe. And everyone's like, well, who is this kid? How does this kid factor into 9? Is this kid the point of the new trilogy? And I hope he isn't. I hope that kid doesn't matter. And I know that sounds harsh, but I hope he doesn't, because I think that was just a symbolic moment of they're trying to, save hope in the galaxy and ignite hope and, be the spark that lights the fire that burns the First Order down, or whatever, however they say it. And I think that kid, he's important for symbolism, and I hope they don't make anything of him, but just because of that, because he's symbolic of there will always be good that rises to fight evil. There will always be those who know what the right thing is, and that will always be the norm, even with a tyrannical empire or a big First Order ruling the galaxy. There will always be those people that are willing to rise to the occasion. So I think that is really what that's going for there. Some people have disagreed with me on that. Some people think that the symbolism there is showing something else. So it was an interesting way to end it, for sure. And what what do you think about it? Because that's for me at least, a bit of a contentious topic.
Yeah, I think it's symbolic, especially because they're he and his compatriots there in the stable are talking about, they're just kind of messing around and almost kind of like playing rebels in a way, if I remember correctly. And so it's kind of like it lives on in the hearts and minds of children, and you can't kill everybody who thinks differently, and it's kind of innocent in its way because it's not really a crime. And it's not very obvious. So you think, oh, wow, yeah, there is that spark. And then when he goes and he does the force pulling them up, I'm just like, oh, come on. Because in a way, you're right. They almost tried too hard with it. And so they could make a lot from him. I kind of hope they don't for the same reason as you, because then it's just like, why didn't he do anything else when they were, at Canto Bight? Or, it's just like, he was very much a marginal character, just kind of there until the end. So, symbolically, you could look at it like hope springs eternal. You could look at it like anybody can, like similar to Rey, no matter what your origins, you can be somebody. There's a whole host of ways you can take it. I'm just not sure how I'd like if, a trilogy was centered on him, or if how they would handle it. Right. So, yeah, I'm in the same mind with you. Yeah, you go.
Oh yeah. So I was just kind of saying, as we wrap up here, my final thoughts on The Last Jedi, and my opinions are allowed to change, people. They are allowed to change over time, as the movie ages, as I watch it again. But I thought the movie was awesome. I think, when I heard Disney was going to make all these Star Wars movies, I actually, as a huge Star Wars fan, like we've been talking about this for an hour and 38 minutes. We're obviously big Star Wars fans. I actually groaned because I'm like, how many different ways are you going to do this? How many different ways can you tell Star Wars? I'm going to get Star Wars fatigue. I'm going to not like this. And there's still a very good possibility of that happening, because I think the Han Solo movie next year is going to be awful. But in relation to The Last Jedi, I think it needed this breath of fresh air. It needed us to reevaluate the way we look at the Jedi, reevaluate the way we look at the Force, and what is the Force, and what's the end goal here? I think that this movie just raises so many great questions, and it does it in a fresh way, and it's not a retread of The Empire Strikes Back. It has a lot in common with ESB and Return of the Jedi, I think, but it's definitely not those movies. And I think that that's good, and I think that it kind of tears the band-aid off for the fandom, in terms of, this is what we're doing now, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But my final thoughts were, it's a great movie. It's a great time at the theater. I mean, when I was in the movie, people were, the opening weekend, people just cheered so much when Kylo killed, Snoke. And you just get these special moments with Star Wars that I don't think you can get with any other franchise. I was at the doctor the other day and I was talking to my doctor, and he hadn't seen the movie yet. I was wearing my Last Jedi t shirt. And he said, I can remember going to the first one. I saw it in the theater. My grandpa was there. He wore a suit. He's like, it was a different time then. But he's like, I can remember all of it. And it's such a cool moment for me. And I think in The Last Jedi, I think The Force Awakens, just because of those familiar A New Hope beats, you're able to kind of get sucked in. But I think The Last Jedi just creates this unique viewing experience where you do kind of remember the audience reaction. You do remember what was going on when you saw that movie, just because, Star Wars provides these experiences that are just so cool, and so it just brings people together. It's just such a great franchise. And I think The Last Jedi, unlike a lot of people what they say, I think it's a great continuation of the Star Wars franchise. It has problems. I know that we're mostly complimentary of this movie through this review. I think that it has issues. The pacing, my dad remarked that the pacing was kind of like, there's definitely a lull when they're getting chased around Canto Bight, which is supposed to be an action sequence, but again, so there's some pacing problems. I have a little bit of a problem with the way that Luke trained Rey, and my biggest problem really is just the Luke character arc, because I would like to see an original character besides Chewbacca, who we didn't talk about at all, actually. Chewbacca's fantastic in this movie. I love that he's around. But, Chewbacca and R2-D2 and C-3PO, those are the only people we have left from the old movies, and those are secondary characters. So I would have liked if they kept Luke. There were, some stylistic things that maybe I didn't agree with, but, I thought it was a great film, a great time at the movies. I think that this movie, to me, has more rewatchability than The Force Awakens, because I know everything that happens in The Force Awakens, and a lot of the questions that they ask in that movie don't really get answered in 8, but I think that 8 is just such a great movie and good to watch. So for me, it's going to get like an A minus, just because of the pacing, the Canto Bight sequence, and the Luke thing. But I mean, I thought it was great, and I know coming into the review, obviously you said you had slightly less favorable opinions, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and your rank, Ed. I've thought long and hard about this. Used very complex science and math to figure out my precise Star Wars rankings. I actually just came up with this, but for me, this movie ranks. For me, it's Episode 5 is the top, followed by Episode 4, followed by The Last Jedi. For now, I think that movie is the third best Star Wars movie, and then we go after that Force Awakens, and then Rogue One, and then The Last Jedi, and then 3, 1, and 2, for me. So, I know I might have rambled on a little bit there, but had a lot to share. So, what's your thoughts, your final thoughts, Ed, and then what's your Star Wars rankings right now?
Well, yeah, I have a mostly positive review. All movies have issues. Whether they get past them's another thing, and I think this movie did. I think it rose above its shortcomings, and it was a nice, viable entry to the Star Wars franchise. And you're right, I do think it was, or I should say, I agree. It is one of the most rewatchable Star Wars movies, because it took those chances. It was different. To use the movie's terminology, it went beyond the past. It didn't let it define it. In a way, it kind of grew beyond it, and that was wonderful. Trying to think. Well, as far as my rankings go, it'd have to be 5, favorite, then 4, because it's just hard to beat the original besides 5. And then I'd go Last Jedi. Then I'd go, believe it or not, I'd go Rogue One, and then I would do 7, 6, and then 3, 1, 2.
Okay. So basically, our rankings are the same, except we flip Force Awakens and Rogue One.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I think Rogue One was higher in my list just because it deviated.
It was a
Like
cool Star Wars action movie, but obviously character development issues in that one. But that's neither here
true.
nor there. I had a great time, Ed. Thanks for joining the podcast. This podcast has gone on so long. If you're still with us at this point, if you listen to it for the full hour 44 that we've been going, please leave a comment down below. I will like that comment. I'll be all over that. And I know we probably rambled, and this isn't the most highly produced. There isn't a great high production cost with this podcast, but like I said, it's just a conversation between friends, and join the conversation. Please comment. What did you think of the movie? Did you agree with our opinions? I'm sure you didn't with some of them. So let us know what you thought down in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next one. So say see ya, Ed, and we will sign off here.
Yeah, thank you for listening. Wow, I didn't even realize it's an hour and 44 minutes.
Time for having fun. Hopefully, we're as entertaining to listen to as we are to, hopefully people like hearing us as much as we like talking, I should say.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, thank you for sticking with us. And wow, have a wonderful, wonderful time. And like Eddie, my opinions will change as I grow older and as I see the movie more often, because I've definitely missed some things. There's always more things to discover in Star Wars. So have a good one.
Yeah, we will see you in the next one. Happy holidays.